Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest from botanyeveryday.com, where you can find him, Mr. Mark Williams. He's an ethnobiologist. Mark has taught hundreds of classes to thousands of people about plants, humans, other life forms, and their interface. His training includes a bachelor's in environmental studies and sustainable agriculture, and also in business. And in Appalachian, he is an expert in Appalachian studies and sustainable development from the Appalachian State University, and also has focused on geography. He has spent over 20 years working at restaurants, farms, and travels throughout 30 countries in Central and North, South America, Europe, and all 50 states in the USA. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
Oh, so happy to be here, Ellen.
Now, your site, botanyyeveryday.com, is a very exciting place to go. You have so much going on there in terms of your online classes and then information about plant families and, all kinds of things that bring together healthy information, integrating plants, nature, and humans.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal.
Now, tell me who ethnobotanist Frank Cook is, who is obviously one of your mentors.
Yes, it's true. And that could be a whole show unto itself, but the short of the long of it, Frank Cook is definitely, I'd say, my greatest mentor of many, and kind of like a big brother slash professor slash the spiritual inspiration. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2009 in August. And so he was 46 when that happened, and that really launched my life into a whole different direction, in large part kind of trying to continue his work, which in a large part was about traveling the world, learning from different cultures, their plant traditions, and trying to weave together a vision of what like a world healing system in particular would be like. What would the top 1,000 healing and food plants of the world be, for instance, would be one thing. But he wrote a lot. He did an online class by donation. He led tours internationally with groups of people and lots of other things besides. And there's a whole website dedicated to maintaining Frank's work and legacy at plantsandhealers.org.
It's amazingly complex the way the world is, because I studied with many, many herbalists from around the world, which I talk about in several of my books. But one I don't know if you have heard of, who is a major ethnobotanical expert, and his name was Dr. Anthony Kweku Andeau from Ghana. And this was many years ago, and then he also passed away. And people who weren't involved at the time when internet was around, because I've been doing this 50 years, there was no internet. A lot of his work has just been lost. But very recently, another young ethnobotanical expert, his name is Essex, he has decided to take on the chore of bringing Dr. Andeau's work back to the forefront. So it's just reminding me of your story. And definitely I'll make sure that you and Essex hook up. And, I think it's an incredible vision of that world healing system.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing to my attention the work of those folks. That's actually been a shift in focus for me, is more looking at the ethnobotany of West Africa. And it also just speaks to this idea, just like we have family lineage bloodlines, that there's kind of an intellectual lineage that's necessary for continuity's sake of this knowledge making it to the future.
Well, that is really true. And as an herbalist and a botanist, which you also have a tremendous amount of focus and learning in, don't you think that's why things like Chinese herbal medicine has really lasted intact because they wrote things down? Well, something like Native American cultural heritage, not so much.
Yeah, so definitely having a written tradition versus only an oral one is going to be helpful for maintaining the knowledge and information through time. And the Cherokee, where I live in Western North Carolina, are remarkable for having developed a syllabary that indigenous man named Sequoia, who the tree was named after, made that can help to maintain their legacy. And yet that is something that's not as common to the indigenous groups of the Americas. And yet I would still say that that oral tradition does stand among numerous groups throughout the Americas, although it's, of course, less easy to access for various different reasons because of that nature.
That's true. And I've spent so much time really delving into learning from elders. For instance, one of the manuscripts I put together was about Mayan culture and Mayan herbal culture. And I'm bilingual, Spanish and English, but I don't speak Mayan. So when I was in that area, I was able to find some people who they could speak Mayan and Spanish. So we visited with their grandmothers who only spoke Mayan, and we were able to, get that information documented, which, is just so amazing because to me, it's global. To me, I really love to see the interconnection between the elders and our time, which is, always moving into the future, but also the cohesive rather than the divisive nature of herbal medicine being shared throughout cultures.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely important to focus on the commonalities more than the differences if we're going to move together in a healthy and peaceful manner. And at times it's hard to do, though, as well, because of the divisiveness of many things that have happened, especially historically, and continue to happen to this day. But that's definitely been a big focus from Frank that I inherited, is this: what is the universality of healing that you see across the world and across various groups?
Wow, that sounds like the good name for a book there, Mark. The universality of, Now, what made you become an ethnobiologist?
Yes, it was kind of a wandering path, as I think is it for a lot of folks, because it's kind of an obscure area of study and one that is hard to really get credentialed in straight up. But for me, it kind of built from the grassroots. I love to eat. And then when I kind of discovered what the industrial food system was like, I was looking for an alternative to that and started to learn how to forage and grow my own food. And then steadily it just built up from there, this kind of wanting to understand what food is around me, what medicine is around me. Also, though, extending out to beauty being its own form of food and medicine. So wanting to learn how to grow cut flowers or dried flowers, for instance. And then from there, wanting to extend out to how do these plants support other life forms like the birds and the bees and the butterflies. And so it just kind of has steadily been moving out and out and out of all these different categories of how we depend on the plants. And it's led me to get those degrees and do all those travels and go to lots of botanical gardens and read lots of books.
And how did you wind up with Appalachia as a focus?
That's an interesting question because, I grew up in a military family, born in California, mostly raised in Florida. I visited Asheville, North Carolina, first time in 1997, 1998. I was visiting the family of a dear friend. And like a lot of people, really kind of from the first moment my foot touched the ground, I felt something special here. And basically started plotting my escape from Florida to make it up here, which took a couple years. But it's just such a special place. Now, having been to those 30 countries in all 50 states, it's my favorite place I've ever been for a lot of reasons, but certainly the nature, the food, the culture of the people, the weather, the climate, all those types of things.
Because you even, have a degree that has that in the name. That's amazing.
That's true. Yeah. And I mean, the whole top floor of the library where I got my graduate degree, Appalachian State University, is dedicated to the region. And I figured at the point that I went to school as a non-traditional student for my master's degree, I felt very rooted in this area. And so what better way to do a deep dive than to get a degree in the region where I live?
Well, I'd like to remind you listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Mr. Mark Williams. That's Mark with a C, Mark Williams, and his website, which I'm looking at right now, it's a wonderful place to visit, is botanyeveryday.com, which is also a good name. And he's sharing with us his journey as an herbalist, as a teacher, and all the many things that he has done and the classes that he's teaching. Now, your classes are ongoing. And of course, like everyone else's, you have lots of online classes as well.
That's correct. And I inherited the online botany class that's by donation at botanyeveryday.com from Frank Cook. He did it for 9 years. I'm now in my 12th year of doing it. And it really follows in Frank's philosophy that money shouldn't be a limiting factor for people to advance themselves. And he had this saying, give what you can, receive what you need. And so I've kept that botany class in that spirit ever since Frank passed and I inherited it. And then, of course, that was really helpful, though, having done online classes for over a decade when this pandemic descended upon us, that a lot of different conferences and various other places of education were forced in a pinch to go online. Then I kind of had all these PowerPoints and some experience with doing that already, just kind of locked and loaded, ready to go.
And that's ongoing. Now, that's interesting to me because one of the many projects that I'm involved in with the American Herbalist Guild is bringing people forth who would like to become an RH, which is a registered herbalist. And one of the requirements is to take a botany class. But it sounds like this would really be something they could do. It doesn't have to be a university-based botany class.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'll have to talk with Mimi Hernandez, who's the director of AHG and actually happens to live in Asheville, along with myself, about that potential. I have heard of different organizations using this as a proxy, and certainly different herbal schools that might not have the time to go super deep into the botany along with everything else they teach. It can be a nice adjunct to that as well. Yeah,
that would be a wonderful thing for people to know, because I'm looking at like your plant families and all the information, and then you have so many handouts about the classes and plant lists. And one thing I'm finding so interesting, I'm not an artsy crafty person, so not for me personally, but many of my herbal students, the concept of a list of natural dye plants that you're putting together, that would never cross my mind. And yet so many people would love that.
And there's this intersectionality, of course, that a lot of natural dye plants are also herbs used for medicine as well. And maybe even similar chemistry is allowing both those things to happen.
That's so true. And that's something that, you have that not everybody would have. You have the depth of knowledge in terms of, let's say, a scientific phytochemistry view of the plant, but also that holistic information about like the ethnobotanical use in the area that it was growing in.
Yeah, just like so many things in the world, it's all connected, and you pull on one and you kind of just keep following down this path to see this web that's woven, these same plants being applied for so many different uses.
And of course, our ancestors, that's what they had. That was it. There were no stores. And I always say that with people in terms of plant walks that I do and looking at foraging and edible and medicinal plants. Anywhere you are in the world, they are there. if there were people there before there was like Publix or the grocery store, that means there definitely is wild, edible, and medicinal plants.
Yes, it's so true. And it makes me think of this time where I visited the place where my grandfather used to live, and there's nothing that's there anymore, like structure-wise of the house or anything. But I remember seeing this sassafras bush there, and I was kind of just had this visceral connection to, oh, they knew this sassafras. And like somehow it felt like through the ages we were connected through this one plant that is so famous to so many.
I know. So that's one of the things that I just love about plant medicine too, that it's something that really all humans used, but we're so cut off from it. In, you know, when you think about food being in plastic bags rather than growing, or worse yet, processed in a box. Like my own house, I always tell my kids are 47 now and 42, but even when they were just born, like we don't have anything with a paragraph on it.
That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, so everything is a piece of food to begin with, and certainly wildcrafted. Now, in wildcrafting, I'm sure you agree, it is an art and a science. Although it's a natural thing, people can harm themselves if they go out and just kind of eat every kind of plant that's outside.
That's true. I mean, there's so much to the ethics and the safety of wild harvesting. Of course, proper identification is key, and when in doubt, leave it out is a nice rule of thumb with that. And yet, of course, we don't want to overharvest either. We want to do it sustainably. And I often will tell people to actually learn the things that might hurt you first, and then that kind of frees you up, because there's relatively few poisonous plants that are out there, although many more in Florida than most of the United States. But if you can kind of learn these patterns, which is what I focus on with my online class by donation, the family patterns, and learn these major, mostly safe or almost entirely safe families like the mint family and the mallow family, the mustard family, then you can tend to find something pretty much everywhere you go. And I definitely tend to also tell people to really emphasize and focus on the more weedy plants, the things that might have even been introduced and are running rampant over the landscape as far as harvesting goes, versus some of the things that might be less common and more threatened.
Right. That's really, see, there's so much information there that you just shared. Like, I love that concept that you say, you sort of know before you go, like when in doubt, leave it out. That's a really good rule of thumb, because do you know, when we talk about the plant families, let's wander over to the parsley family. Like anyone might think, oh, parsley, we eat parsley, it's fine. This is in the parsley family. Yet so is hemlock, which killed Socrates. So
yeah, exactly. That's a tricky one, because there's so many things in that family that we eat, from dill to fennel to cumin and coriander and on, as well as the parsley, carrots and parsnips, lots of cool root crops. But then, like you said, there is this group of plants. There are a few different things that are called poison hemlock that are some of the most deadly plants in the world. And I remember a saying one of my professors taught me in undergrad, which is that the devil's in the details. And so these rules can be helpful, but you really need to know the exception to the rule, of which there almost always is, right?
And I'm thinking now, here on Long Island, whereas one of my homes here is so rich with edible and medicinal wild plants. That's why it's one of my favorite places. Well, I find in Florida, there seems to, even though you would think it's tropical, there actually seems to be a lot less of a variety, because I guess the weather is all the same and the soil is not as rich. But it definitely does not seem to me to have the vast array of edible and medicinals that we have here in the Northeast.
That's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought too much of that, but off the top of my head, I kind of could see how, like, it feels like there's maybe more wild greens in a way, especially herbaceous, low-growing things,
right,
in more cold places than in the tropics. And yeah, of course, in the tropics, they're going to have way more fruit.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Dream of.
We do. I have an avocado tree and a papaya tree right in front of my house. And we have bidens. We have a lot also. I mean, every plant, every region is so rich. My first botanical foray into learning about plants was actually in the Southwest because my children were born in Bisbee, Arizona. And at that time, I was a midwife doing home deliveries and, we living there for many years on a homestead. But there is another whole array of plants. It's so different.
It's true. Yeah, I just kind of put a lot of time into the online class that I have for the desert Southwest and other desert places of the world. And it is just a whole different ball of wax out there. Yeah,
completely different. Now, do you know an herbalist named Mimi Kemp or Michael Moore?
Because Michael Moore in particular, Michael Moore is a teacher of a number of my teachers. So I'm kind of his intellectual grandchild, I guess.
Right. So he was a contemporary of mine in Bisbee, Arizona. He moved there way later than I did, but towards the end of his life. In fact, that's where he was at the end of his life. And Mimi Kemp was a person who worked with him and me. She did illustration of some of my books and his. So, we had a great herbal community there in Bisbee, Arizona. And I was so happy to learn those wild plants, but there's lots of poisonous ones and also sticky ones there that will give you, various kinds of injuries if you don't know what you're doing with them. So there is certainly a lot to know. So here's a tricky question. And how do you answer this question? I'd love to know. We're talking today with our guest, Mark Williams. You can find out more at botanyeveryday.com. I don't like when people ask me this question, but I'm going to ask it to you because you kind of suggested it. What's your favorite plant?
Okay, yeah, that is a tricky one. I'm thinking I'm pushing over 2,000 species of plants I'm familiar with, and I love every one in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And I tend to break it down into categories. So my favorite root vegetable, for instance, is pretty easy. I think that'd be the carrot. And definitely one of my favorite fruits would be an apple or blueberry or juneberry. They're kind of duking it out for the top spot.
And this is really interesting. When I was discussing plant families in a class last week, a lot of people were surprised to hear, and I know for sure but who would think that a lot of those that you just mentioned with those pitted fruits are actually in the same family as a rose?
Exactly. It's typically called the rose family. And it's such a big family, it's often broken up into smaller sections. So roses are with some of the other brambles like blackberries and raspberries, as well as other small things like strawberries. And then the apples are typically with other things that are called pomes with 5 seeds like pears, and the juneberries I mentioned, hawthorns. Then you have the single pitted ones like the cherries and plums and nectarines and peaches. And spirea is also related to this, which is very different. It doesn't have a fleshy fruit, but is a very famous medicine.
So now you're bringing to mind something that I just ate yesterday in my home in Florida before I flew to my home in New York, which is acerola cherries. They're out now. Now that is a fantastic fruit.
It's true. And that one, though, is from the tropics, and I'm trying to think of exactly even what family that one is in.
Right. I don't think it's the same, but yeah, that's right.
It's in a different family.
Right.
But, a lot of things, especially in the tropics, are called cherry this, cherry that. You got the Suriname cherry and these types of things that are sometimes in the myrtle family or others.
Yeah. So it's just a very, very interesting journey that you continue to be on. And what is your favorite place that you have visited? I think you might have said it's right where your home is.
Yeah, I would definitely, if I had to pick one, it's definitely in southern Appalachia, around western North Carolina. There's a few others as well out there, of course, having seen so many. And I'm half Dutch. My mom lives in Holland, so I guess I definitely have to do a shout out for the Netherlands, where my mom lives.
Oh, and she's there now. You get to still visit there. That's interesting. I've actually never been there. I've been to many areas of the world, but that's like a little far north for me. I definitely tend to do the southern stuff and have spent lots of time in Mexico and South America and in southern areas of Europe, such as southern Spain and things like that. I've never done too many things in the north, so we'll allow you to bring that information to us. And big in your bio and big now is the word sustainable. And you were into this a very long time.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, it's something that is at the core of allowing our species to maintain here. A lot of people will say we've got to save the earth. And I like to push back and say the earth will be fine. It's just saving our place on it. And sustainability is going to be a key for that. We have to have practices that are good for people, good for the planet, and also that can allow people to have a good living, without like denuding the resources that living depends upon.
That is so true. And that's a complicated issue, but so important to have as part of the discussion. And, when I was actually in college in the late 1960s, I minored in environmental sustainability also, and it was just like not even recognized. Yes, the textbooks were full of the information of what's happening now in terms of the elevated temperatures and why that's been caused and all that stuff. So it's not new. It was just widely ignored.
Exactly. Yeah, I think about sometimes even when I was getting my undergrad at Warren Wilson College, and like you said, all the stuff about the climate, all the stuff about the chemical pollution. I mean, Rachel Carson was decades old at that point, and yet fast forward, almost 20 years, and we've done so little to address these things that we've known about for so long.
Well, perhaps there will be a shift, and part of that shift will come from people like you and your work, and you're sharing it so beautifully and making it super cost effective, so you're not putting up barriers to learning to anyone who is interested, like giving a free botany course. Hopefully you at least take donations, to support your time in doing that, and that makes it accessible for anyone.
Yeah, it's all about creating win-win-win situations, where everybody can move ahead collectively together. And I certainly do take donations. I actually don't say it's free because it can be free, but obviously whenever you're getting something for free, somebody's picking up the tab. And I certainly paid tens of thousands of dollars for my education that wasn't free. So, but at the same time, I really think that this knowledge is above and beyond the profit motive. And I just ask people to look in their heart and give what they can and receive what they need.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. And we will speak to you again soon. I invite people to join you at botanyeveryday.com and also plantsandhealers.org, which you've taken up to move forward with. And thank you so much for being our guest today. And
thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in once again to Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.